When we examine moments of institutional tension in the United States, particularly those that involve the interaction between the executive branch and the federal judiciary, it is important to approach the discussion with clarity, patience, and a firm grounding in the principles that guide our constitutional system. Recent developments surrounding federal court decisions affecting former President Donald Trump have understandably drawn significant public attention. These moments often produce strong reactions in political discourse, but from an economic and institutional perspective, they are best understood as examples of the checks and balances that have long defined American governance. The United States has historically maintained a system in which no single branch of government holds unilateral authority. The judiciary, composed of federal courts and ultimately the Supreme Court, plays a central role in interpreting the law and ensuring that executive actions remain consistent with constitutional principles. When courts issue rulings that challenge or constrain executive decisions, it can appear dramatic in the moment, but in reality, it reflects a process that is deeply embedded in the structure of American democracy. From a broader economic standpoint, the strength of institutions such as the federal judiciary has significant implications for financial stability, investment confidence, and long-term economic growth. Markets function most effectively when participants believe that rules are predictable, contracts are enforceable, and decisions are made within a transparent legal framework. When courts exercise their authority to review government actions, they reinforce the credibility of that framework. Investors, businesses, and households rely on the knowledge that the rule of law operates independently of political cycles. In the current environment, legal developments surrounding high-profile political figures naturally attract heightened scrutiny. However, it is important to separate the immediate political narrative from the structural reality. Federal courts do not turn against individuals in a political sense. Rather, judges evaluate evidence, statutory interpretation, and constitutional considerations within the bounds of established legal procedures. Their decisions are guided by legal reasoning rather than political alignment, even if those decisions become politically consequential. This distinction matters greatly when we consider the long-term health of the American economy. Confidence in institutions is one of the most valuable assets any economy can possess. It shapes how global investors perceive risk, influences currency stability, and ultimately affects the cost of capital across financial markets. When institutions demonstrate independence and adherence to legal principles, even under intense political pressure, it reinforces the credibility of the broader economic system. In periods of uncertainty, whether driven by political developments, geopolitical tensions, or shifts in global markets, institutional stability serves as an anchor. Over the past several decades, the United States has benefited from a reputation for strong governance structures. This reputation has supported the dollar's role as the world's primary reserve currency, encouraged international investment, and provided resilience during periods of global financial stress. It is also important to recognize that judicial rulings often unfold within complex legal timelines. Initial decisions by federal courts may lead to appeals, further review, and in some cases, consideration by higher courts. This layered process ensures that legal questions receive careful examination. While headlines may emphasize the immediate outcome of a single decision, the full legal process typically extends over months or even years. For the public, the rapid pace of modern media can create the impression that institutional conflict represents instability, yet in many respects, the opposite is true. The ability of courts to challenge executive actions without interference demonstrates that constitutional mechanisms are functioning as intended. It is precisely this capacity for lawful disagreement among branches of government that strengthens democratic governance. From the perspective of economic policy, these dynamics intersect with broader questions about fiscal responsibility, regulatory stability, and public confidence in policymaking institutions. Markets tend to react not simply to political events themselves, but to perceptions about whether those events threaten the reliability of governing systems. When institutions continue to operate according to established rules, uncertainty tends to remain contained. As observers evaluate the current legal developments, it is therefore useful to step back and consider the broader institutional context. The United States has faced numerous moments in which courts have issued decisions affecting presidents, major legislation, or executive authority. In many cases, those decisions were controversial at the time, yet they ultimately reinforced the durability of constitutional governance. This moment should be viewed through that same lens. The interaction between federal courts and political leadership may generate intense debate, but it also demonstrates the resilience of institutional frameworks that have supported American economic strength for generations. In an era defined by rapid technological change, evolving global supply chains, and shifting geopolitical relationships, maintaining confidence in those frameworks is more important than ever. Economic stability ultimately depends on more than interest rates, fiscal policy, or trade balances. It also depends on trust. Trust that institutions operate transparently, that legal systems remain impartial, and that decisions are made according to established principles rather than short-term political pressures. The ongoing legal developments surrounding prominent political figures should therefore be understood not only as political events, but also as reflections of institutional processes that underpin economic stability. In the discussion that follows, it is helpful to explore how these institutional dynamics intersect with broader economic considerations. Understanding that connection allows us to move beyond the headlines and consider what these developments may mean for financial markets, investor confidence, and the long-term trajectory of the American economy. As we move deeper into the implications of these judicial developments, it is useful to consider the broader relationship between legal institutions and economic stability. In modern economies, particularly one as large and complex as that of the United States, the rule of law is not simply a philosophical concept, it is a foundational component of market functioning. Financial markets, business investment, and international trade all rely heavily on the assumption that legal systems operate predictably and independently. When federal courts render decisions that challenge or scrutinize actions taken by political leaders, the immediate public response often centers on the political ramifications. Yet, from an economic standpoint, what matters most is the credibility of the legal process itself. Investors around the world watch closely to see whether institutions remain resilient and whether decisions are guided by established procedures rather than political pressure. The strength of the U.S. legal system has historically served as a stabilizing force during periods of political turbulence. To understand this relationship more clearly, it is helpful to reflect on how institutional credibility influences financial markets. The United States benefits from a unique position in the global economy. The U.S. dollar functions as the dominant reserve currency. American capital markets are among the deepest and most liquid in the world, and U.S. Treasury securities are widely regarded as among the safest financial assets available. These advantages are not accidental. They are the product of decades of policy credibility, regulatory transparency, and institutional strength. Confidence in institutions, including the federal judiciary, plays a critical role in sustaining that credibility. When courts demonstrate independence and adherence to legal standards, they reinforce the perception that the United States remains governed by rules rather than personalities. This distinction is particularly important in times when political discourse becomes polarized or when high-profile legal cases capture public attention. In the context of recent legal developments involving former President Donald Trump, the public narrative often emphasizes the element of surprise or political drama. Headlines may frame court decisions as sudden or shocking, but in reality, the legal system functions through deliberate and structured processes. Judges review arguments presented by both sides, analyze statutory frameworks, and apply precedent that may span decades or even centuries. The outcome of these deliberations reflects legal reasoning rather than political momentum. This distinction has implications beyond the courtroom. Businesses, both domestic and international, rely on stable legal environments when making long-term investment decisions. Whether a company is considering building a manufacturing facility, expanding technological infrastructure, or entering a new market, it must evaluate the reliability of the legal framework within which it will operate. A system that consistently applies legal standards, even in politically sensitive cases, encourages investment and economic expansion. Moreover, the judiciary serves as an essential mediator when disputes arise between different branches of government. In the United States, economic policy is shaped through the combined actions of Congress, the executive branch, and independent agencies. At times, these actors pursue different priorities, and disagreements can emerge regarding the scope of authority or the interpretation of statutes. The courts provide a mechanism through which those disagreements can be resolved in a structured and lawful manner. The economic benefits of this process are substantial. When disputes are resolved through legal channels rather than through abrupt political confrontation, the risk of sudden policy reversals is reduced. Financial markets value this predictability. Investors can tolerate political disagreement. What they find more destabilizing is uncertainty about whether institutional rules will be followed. The American system of judicial review helps mitigate that uncertainty. Another important dimension involves international perceptions of U.S. governance. Global investors, sovereign wealth funds, and multinational corporations all monitor developments within the American political and legal system. Their decisions about where to allocate capital often depend on the relative stability of competing economies. The United States has long been viewed as a jurisdiction where property rights are secure and legal disputes are adjudicated fairly. Maintaining that reputation remains essential for sustaining long-term economic leadership. In recent years, the global economic environment has become increasingly complex. Supply chains have been reshaped by geopolitical tensions, technological innovation is transforming labor markets, and central banks around the world are navigating the delicate balance between controlling inflation and supporting growth. In this environment, institutional stability provides a form of economic resilience. When legal institutions operate effectively, they reduce the likelihood that political disputes will translate into systemic economic disruption. It is also worth noting that judicial decisions rarely represent the final stage of legal debate. In many instances, rulings by federal district courts are followed by appeals to higher courts, where additional legal analysis takes place. This multi-layered structure allows for careful consideration of complex issues and ensures that major legal questions receive thorough review. While this process may appear slow compared to the rapid pace of political commentary, its deliberate nature contributes to the legitimacy of the final outcome. For policymakers, the interaction between law and economics underscores the importance of preserving institutional independence. Economic growth does not occur in isolation from governance structures. Rather, it emerges from a system in which policies are implemented transparently, laws are applied consistently, and institutions maintain credibility across political transitions. When these conditions are present, businesses and households can plan for the future with greater confidence. The legal developments currently capturing public attention should therefore be understood within this broader framework. They represent not simply a moment of political controversy, but an illustration of how institutional processes operate under conditions of heightened scrutiny. The courts are fulfilling their role within the constitutional system, and in doing so, they reinforce principles that have supported American economic strength for generations. As we continue examining these events, it is helpful to keep in mind the long-term perspective. Political cycles come and go, individual leaders rise and fall, but the durability of institutions ultimately determines whether economic stability endures. The United States has navigated numerous periods of political tension throughout its history, yet its legal and financial systems have consistently demonstrated remarkable resilience. Understanding that resilience provides valuable insight into how current developments may unfold. It reminds us that while headlines may focus on the immediate drama of a legal ruling, the deeper story often lies in the continued functioning of institutions that safeguard both democracy and economic prosperity. As we continue examining the broader implications of these legal developments, it is important to consider how institutional events intersect with the evolving landscape of the American economy. Political and legal developments do not exist in isolation. They operate within a complex ecosystem that includes financial markets, fiscal policy, labor dynamics, and global economic conditions. Understanding this interconnected system helps clarify why institutional credibility carries such significant economic weight. Over the past several years, the United States has navigated a period of considerable economic adjustment. The pandemic era introduced unprecedented fiscal and monetary interventions designed to stabilize households, businesses, and financial markets. Those policies were successful in preventing a deeper economic contraction, but they also contributed to a complex recovery environment characterized by supply chain disruptions, inflationary pressures, and shifting labor market dynamics. Policymakers have since been working carefully to restore balance while sustaining long-term growth. In this environment, stability in governance becomes particularly valuable when markets face uncertainty about inflation trajectories, interest rate paths, or global trade conditions. The reliability of institutions provides a crucial source of reassurance. Investors, businesses, and households need to believe that policy decisions will continue to be guided by established processes. The functioning of the judicial system is one of the clearest signals that those processes remain intact. Legal challenges involving prominent political figures can generate intense media attention, but they also provide an opportunity to observe how institutional safeguards operate under pressure. The federal judiciary was designed precisely for such circumstances. Its independence ensures that legal questions can be evaluated without direct influence from electoral politics. That independence helps maintain confidence not only in the legal system itself, but also in the broader governance framework that supports economic activity. From a financial perspective, credibility in governance reduces risk premiums across markets. When investors believe that institutions will uphold contracts and resolve disputes fairly, they are more willing to allocate capital. Lower perceived risk translates into lower borrowing costs for businesses and governments alike. This dynamic contributes directly to economic growth by making investment more accessible and predictable. Conversely, when institutional reliability comes into question, financial markets can react swiftly. Uncertainty about legal outcomes or governance structures can influence currency values, equity markets, and sovereign bond yields. The United States has historically been able to avoid these destabilizing effects precisely because its institutions have maintained a strong reputation for independence and transparency. Even during periods of political conflict, the underlying legal framework has remained steady. This reputation also plays an important role in the international economy. Global capital flows tend to gravitate toward environments where rules are clearly defined and consistently applied. The United States has benefited enormously from this pattern. Foreign investment supports domestic job creation, expands technological innovation, and strengthens the country's position within global supply chains. Maintaining confidence in the integrity of American institutions, therefore, has implications that extend well beyond domestic politics. Another dimension worth considering is the relationship between institutional stability and fiscal policymaking. Governments must routinely make complex decisions about taxation, spending priorities, and debt management. These decisions influence everything from infrastructure development to education funding and healthcare access. When institutions function smoothly, fiscal policy debates can unfold within a framework that allows disagreements to be resolved constructively. The courts occasionally play a role in this process as well, particularly when questions arise about statutory interpretation or the limits of executive authority. While such legal reviews can appear contentious, they often provide clarity that ultimately strengthens policy implementation. By defining the boundaries within which policies operate, judicial rulings help ensure that government actions remain consistent with constitutional principles. It is also important to recognize that institutional strength contributes to long-term economic planning. Businesses often make investment decisions that span decades. Building a manufacturing plant, developing advanced technologies, or constructing energy infrastructure requires confidence that the legal environment will remain stable over time. Countries that maintain reliable institutions tend to attract these long term investments, which in turn support productivity growth and higher living standards. For American households, the benefits of institutional stability may be less visible, but are no less significant. Stable legal systems support functioning financial markets, which help determine mortgage rates, retirement savings performance, and access to credit. When institutions operate effectively, households can make financial decisions with greater certainty about the future. In moments when legal developments capture national attention, it can therefore be helpful to step back and view them through a wider economic lens. The judicial process, even when it involves contentious or politically sensitive issues, represents a mechanism for resolving disputes peacefully and lawfully. That capacity is one of the defining strengths of democratic governance. The current developments involving federal courts and political leadership illustrate this principle. While public debate may focus on immediate reactions or political implications, the deeper significance lies in the continued functioning of institutional safeguards. Judges evaluate legal arguments, decisions are subject to appeal, and outcomes emerge through a structured process rather than through abrupt shifts in power. As the American economy continues to adapt to technological change, global competition, and evolving demographic trends, preserving institutional credibility will remain essential. Economic resilience depends not only on policy choices, but also on the frameworks within which those choices are implemented. Strong institutions create the conditions under which innovation can flourish and markets can operate efficiently. Looking ahead, it is likely that legal debates involving political leaders will continue to arise. Such debates are an inevitable feature of a vibrant democratic system. What matters most is that the mechanisms for addressing those debates remain intact. When courts operate independently and decisions are grounded in legal reasoning, the integrity of the broader system is reinforced. In that sense, the present moment should not be viewed solely as a political event. It is also a reminder of the institutional architecture that supports both democratic governance and economic prosperity in the United States. Understanding that architecture helps place current developments within the longer narrative of American stability and resilience.